They thought towing my truck would cost me $500 and teach me a lesson. 6 months later, it cost them over $500,000 instead. The crazy part is that I never set out to destroy anybody. I just refused to let someone push me around because they thought I was too ordinary to fight back. My name is Cole Bennett, and back in 2022, I was 37 years old, living in a small apartment complex outside Lubbock, Texas, working long days as a diesel mechanic. My life wasn't exciting. Most mornings started before sunrise with black coffee, a drive to the shop, and 10 hours of fixing machines other people had managed to break. I wasn't rich, I wasn't connected, and I definitely wasn't the kind of guy who spent his free time reading legal documents. I was just trying to pay bills, take care of my mom, and maybe save enough money to buy a little piece of land someday. The one thing I was proud of was my truck. It was a lifted Silverado I'd spent years paying off, and inside the locking tool chest in the bed were thousands of dollars worth of professional equipment I collected one paycheck at a time. Every night, I parked it beneath my second-floor apartment window. Technically, the space wasn't assigned, but after nearly 4 years, everybody knew that was where my truck sat. The neighbors knew it. The maintenance guys knew it. Even the delivery drivers seemed to know it. It was one of those unspoken arrangements that develops naturally when people live together long enough. Then one Tuesday morning, everything changed. I walked outside carrying a coffee mug and my lunch cooler, glanced toward my usual spot, and immediately stopped. The space was empty. At first, I genuinely thought somebody had stolen the truck. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I started scanning the lot, checking rows, looking behind buildings, trying to convince myself I'd somehow parked somewhere else the night before. Then I noticed fresh paint on the asphalt. Bright white lines. New numbers. New signs. My stomach sank even further. I walked over and read one of them. Assigned parking only. Unauthorized vehicles subject to immediate tow. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Sometime overnight management had completely changed the parking system. No warning. No phone call. No email. Nothing. A maintenance worker named Ramon happened to be nearby, and when I asked where my truck was, he gave me that uncomfortable look people get when they already know you're not going to like the answer. Management had several vehicles towed last night, he said, including mine. He nodded slowly. Sorry, man. The impound yard was nearly 12 miles away. I borrowed my buddy Travis's pickup and drove there feeling more irritated with every mile. The truck itself wasn't even what made me angry anymore. It was the principle. I'd paid rent on time for years. Never caused problems. Never missed a payment. Yet, somehow management couldn't be bothered to give residents a proper heads up before towing their vehicles. When I arrived at the impound office, a guy behind thick glass slid paperwork toward me without even making eye contact. I looked down and almost laughed. $525. Then I saw another line. $75 per day storage beginning tomorrow. I looked back at the clerk. $525? He shrugged. That's the total. For parking where I've parked for 4 years. Another shrug. Take it up with your apartment complex. Most people would have paid. Honestly, I probably should have. That would have been the smart thing. Pay the money. Get the truck. Move on. But standing there looking at that bill, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the disrespect. Maybe it was the way the whole thing felt like a setup. Maybe it was because I'd spent years watching companies squeeze ordinary people and count on them being too busy or too tired to push back. Whatever it was, I folded the paperwork, slid it back through the opening, smiled at the clerk, and said, Nah, I think I'm good. The guy actually blinked. You're not getting your truck? Not today. Then storage starts tomorrow. Guess we'll see. I turned around and walked out. The entire drive home, I kept replaying everything in my head. The sudden rule change. The towing fee. The complete lack of communication. The confidence management seemed to have that nobody would question any of it. By the time I got back to my apartment, I wasn't thinking about my truck anymore. I was thinking about management. Specifically, I was thinking about how people act when they believe they're untouchable. That afternoon, I sat down at my kitchen table with a laptop and started digging through county property records. At first, I was just looking for leverage. Maybe a permit issue. Maybe some paperwork mistake. Maybe something that would force them to release my truck. Instead, after several hours of searching through maps, tax filings, and ownership records, I found something so strange I thought I'd read it wrong. I checked it again. Then a third time. Then I printed the document just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. According to the county records, the apartment complex didn't actually own the parking lot, and the deeper I dug, the more unbelievable the story became. According to the county records, the apartment complex didn't actually own the parking lot, and the deeper I dug, the more unbelievable the story became. At first I assumed there had to be some explanation. Maybe a parent company owned it. Maybe ownership had recently changed and the database hadn't updated yet. But the more documents I pulled, the stranger everything looked. The apartment buildings, clubhouse, pool, leasing office, and every patch of landscaping belonged to one company. The parking lot belonged to an entirely different parcel. That alone was unusual. But what really caught my attention were the tax records. The parcel had accumulated years of unpaid property taxes. Not 1 year. Not 2 years. Several years. I remember leaning closer to the screen because I genuinely thought I was misunderstanding something. Then I found a foreclosure notice. The county had already started proceedings. An auction was scheduled for the following month. Minimum bid was just under $10,000. I sat there staring at the screen while my coffee went cold. The whole thing felt absurd. 24 hours earlier, I was worried about a towing fee. Now I was looking at a legal pathway that could potentially put me in control of the very parking lot management was using against residents. For the next few weeks I became obsessed. Every night after work I'd sit at my kitchen table, surrounded by printouts and handwritten notes. Travis thought I'd lost my mind. "You're telling me you're researching how to buy a parking lot because somebody towed your truck?" he asked one evening. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." He shook his head. "You realize normal people just complain on Facebook, right?" Maybe he was right, but I couldn't let it go. The more I learned, the more I felt like I had stumbled onto something important. What bothered me most wasn't even the towing anymore. It was the arrogance behind it. Management had acted like they controlled everything. They charged residents premium parking fees, threatened towing, and enforced rules with complete confidence. Yet somehow they hadn't bothered to make sure they actually owned the land beneath those parking spaces. That disconnect fascinated me. It felt like watching someone stand on a stage giving orders while the floor slowly collapsed beneath them. I started taking every overtime shift available. Saturdays, Sundays, emergency call-outs, anything that added money to my savings account. I sold an old fishing boat I rarely used. I cashed out vacation time. By the time auction day arrived, I had just enough money to participate and not nearly enough money to feel comfortable about it. The auction itself was surprisingly boring. No dramatic bidding war. No crowded room. Mostly investors staring at paperwork and quietly evaluating opportunities. The parcel attracted little attention because it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't commercial development land. It wasn't a shopping center. It was simply a parking lot. A giant rectangle of asphalt. To most investors, it looked forgettable. To me, it looked like leverage. When bidding closed and I realized I had won, I actually sat there in silence for several seconds. One county employee congratulated me and handed over paperwork. I walked back to my truck feeling equal parts excited and terrified. There was still a chance I'd made the dumbest financial decision of my life. 30 days later, the deed was officially recorded. The ownership transfer became legal. The parking lot belonged to me. The first person I told was old Mr. Hansen from Building D. He spent most afternoons sitting outside feeding birds and watching the world go by. When I explained what happened, he stared at me for a long moment before laughing so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. "Son, if this works, people are going to be talking about this story for years." I didn't realize how right he was. The following morning, I walked into the leasing office carrying a folder. Behind the front desk sat the property manager, a woman named Valerie Pierce. Valerie wasn't necessarily a bad person, but she had developed a reputation among residents. Every problem somehow became somebody else's fault. Every complaint got buried beneath corporate language. Every conversation ended with a reminder about fees, policies, or regulations. She looked up when I entered. "Good morning, Cole." "Morning." I placed the folder on the counter. "Just wanted to introduce myself." She frowned slightly. "Introduce yourself?" "As your new landlord." Her expression immediately shifted. "Excuse me." I slid the deed toward her. "Not for the apartments. Just for the parking lot." She laughed. The receptionist laughed too. Valerie picked up the document, still smiling. Then she started reading. Slowly the smile disappeared. The receptionist stopped laughing. The room became quiet enough to hear the air conditioner running. Valerie looked back up at me. "Where did you get this?" "County auction." "That's impossible." "Apparently not." She read the document again. This can't be right. The county seems to think it is. For the first time since I'd known her, Valerie genuinely looked rattled. I thanked her for her time and walked out before she could recover. That night, I designed a simple flyer on my laptop. Bright orange. Large letters. Impossible to ignore. The next morning, I slipped one under every windshield wiper in the lot. The notice explained that the property was under new ownership, existing permits were no longer valid, and monthly parking would now cost $30. Residents who had been paying $125 for premium parking nearly lost their minds. Except they weren't angry. They were thrilled. My phone started ringing nonstop. Some people thought it was a joke. Others thought it was a scam. Once they confirmed it was real, support poured in from every direction. One elderly resident knocked on my door with homemade cookies. A young couple brought me barbecue. Several people offered to help collect payments. It became clear very quickly that management had spent years frustrating residents, and now someone had unexpectedly handed them an alternative. Valerie and the corporate office did not share the community's excitement. Within days they started making calls. First came letters, then warnings, then threats. One afternoon Valerie stopped me near the mailbox area. "You know this situation is creating problems." "For who?" I asked. "For everyone." Residents seemed pretty happy. Her jaw tightened. "You can't seriously think this arrangement will continue. I own the lot. Why wouldn't it?" She lowered her voice. "Because corporations don't lose battles like this." I smiled. Maybe they shouldn't start them then. Things escalated after that. Management contacted local police, claiming there was some kind of fraud involved. Officers reviewed the deed, checked county records, and found everything legal. Then management made an even bigger mistake. They authorized another tow. The vehicle belonged to a resident named Sandra, a single mother who worked nights at a hospital. She called me in tears because she couldn't get to work. 45 minutes later, I was standing at the impound yard with copies of the deed and a deputy sheriff who had become strangely invested in the story. The tow company manager looked exhausted before we even started talking. Once he saw the paperwork, his shoulders dropped. Sandra's vehicle was released almost immediately. By evening, the tow company informed management they wanted no further involvement in the dispute. That single incident changed everything. Residents who had been quietly watching from the sidelines suddenly became vocal. Community social media pages exploded. Local reporters heard about the situation. News vans started appearing outside the complex. Interviews were scheduled. Cameras rolled. One television station aired a segment titled "The Mechanic Who Bought the Parking Lot." The story spread across town faster than anyone expected. A few residents even printed T-shirts that read Team Cole across the front. The first time I saw one, I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. Mr. Hansen wore his almost every day. "If we're doing this," he said proudly, "we're doing it right." Meanwhile, the corporate office grew increasingly desperate. Their first offer arrived through an attorney. $25,000. I declined. A month later, they offered $75,000. I declined again. Then $150,000. Then $250,000. Every offer told me the same thing. They needed that parking lot far more than I needed to sell it. One afternoon, a senior corporate attorney flew in from Dallas and requested a meeting. We sat in folding chairs near my usual parking space, the exact place where my truck had been parked before all this started. He was polite, professional, and clearly tired of dealing with the situation. After a few minutes of small talk, he slid a folder across the table. $300,000, he said. I opened it. Read the offer. Closed it again. No, he sighed. Mr. Bennett, this has gone on long enough. I agree. Then let's finish it. I looked around the parking lot. Residents were watching from balconies. A news van sat across the street. Months earlier, management thought nobody would challenge them. Now the entire city seemed interested in the outcome. The attorney leaned forward. What number would end this today? I thought about the impound bill. $525. The amount that started everything. Then I smiled. $525,000. The attorney stared at me. You're serious? Completely. He shook his head and stood up. That's never happening. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he wanted me to believe it too. But as I watched him walk toward his rental car, something told me this fight was entering its final chapter. And before it was over, somebody was going to blink. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he wanted me to believe it too. But as I watched him walk toward his rental car, something told me this fight was entering its final chapter. And before it was over, somebody was going to blink. The next few months turned into a strange blur of lawyers, reporters, phone calls, and rumors. Every week, there seemed to be a new story floating around the complex. One day, people were saying the corporation planned to sue me. The next day, somebody claimed they were preparing a new offer. Through all of it, I kept going to work, fixing engines, changing hydraulic pumps, and trying not to laugh every time I came home and saw another resident wearing a Team Cole shirt. What surprised me most was how personal the situation had become for everyone else. Residents weren't supporting me because of a parking lot anymore. They were supporting what the parking lot represented. For years they had felt ignored, talked down to, and treated like numbers on a spreadsheet. Now, for the first time, somebody had pushed back and actually won a round. One evening I was sitting outside with Mr. Hansen watching the sunset paint the asphalt orange when he asked, "You know they're eventually going to pay, right?" I shrugged. "Maybe." He laughed. "Son, corporations don't keep sending lawyers unless they're already losing money." The funny thing was, he turned out to be right. A few weeks later my phone rang while I was at work. Dallas area code. I stepped outside the shop and answered. The voice on the other end belonged to a senior executive from the parent company. No threats. No lectures. No attempts to intimidate me. Just business. We talked for nearly 20 minutes. When the conversation finally reached the number, I actually smiled before he even said it, because somehow I already knew what was coming. $525,000, he said. For a second I thought I misheard him. Then he repeated it. $525,000. Not 500,000. Not 550,000. Exactly 525,000. The same number that had been printed on the towing invoice months earlier. I looked out across the yard behind the repair shop and couldn't help laughing. The executive paused. "Something funny. You have no idea." The paperwork took a few more weeks, but the hard part was over. Eventually the contracts were signed. The funds were transferred, and one ordinary Tuesday morning, I opened my bank account and saw more money than I'd ever imagined having. People always picture moments like that as some huge celebration, but honestly it was quiet. I just sat there staring at the screen while my coffee got cold. Then I thought about my mother. Years earlier she'd fallen in love with a small house outside town, a place with a wraparound porch and enough yard space for a garden. She never bought it because life got in the way. Bills happened. Responsibilities happened. So the first major thing I did after the deal closed was buy her a house she'd always deserved. Watching her cry when I handed over the keys meant more to me than the money ever could. After that, life slowly settled down. The reporters disappeared. The lawyers stopped calling. The parking lot became just a parking lot again. A few months later, I bought a new truck and parked it in the exact same space where this entire story began. Same location. Same view from my apartment window. Only this time there was a custom metal sign standing beside it, a gift from several neighbors. The sign read, "Property of Cole Bennett. Tow this, and we're doing round 2. Every time I looked at it, I laughed. Not because of the money. Not because I beat a corporation. But because the entire chain of events had been so unnecessary. A little communication would have prevented everything. A little respect would have prevented everything. Instead, somebody got comfortable exercising power over people they assumed couldn't fight back. That's the part that stayed with me long after the money was gone. Power makes people careless. It convinces them they're untouchable. And sometimes all it takes is one overlooked detail, one forgotten tax bill, one ordinary guy asking questions, for that illusion to come crashing down. Even today, people still argue about what happened. Some think I took things too far. Some think I should have accepted an earlier offer and walked away. Others think the company got exactly what it deserved. Honestly, I can see all sides. Maybe holding out for $525,000 was justice. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe it was a little of both. What I do know is this. Nobody forced them to tow my truck. Nobody forced them to ignore their residents. And nobody forced them to lose control of the very property they thought gave them all the leverage. But what do you think? If you were in my shoes, would you have taken the first offer? Or would you have held out until the very end? Was this a story about standing up for yourself? Or did the whole thing go too far? Let me know down in the comments, because stories like this always divide people, and honestly, that's what makes them worth talking about.